Welcome to Sun Moon Saga. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. Maggie's heart pounded as she stood in the dusty, dimly lit foyer of her old family home, now a shadow of its former self. The walls, once vibrant with memories, seemed to hold their breath as she and Tom, her ex-husband, exchanged uneasy glances. "Can you believe we're back here?" Tom muttered, shaking his head. Maggie's hands trembled as she touched the faded wallpaper, feeling the weight of a past she'd tried to escape. The tension crackled like static between them, familiar yet foreign. As she peeled away a section of the old wallpaper, a small, hidden compartment was revealed. Inside was a dusty, ornate box. Maggie's breath caught. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. What secret lay buried within these walls, and why did it feel like it was somehow tied to their fractured past? Maggie's fingers shook as she opened the box, and inside, she found a collection of dazzling jewelry, emeralds, diamonds, and gold, each piece more exquisite than the last. Her eyes widened. "Tom, you need to see this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom peered over her shoulder, his brows furrowing in disbelief. "Is this a joke?" But it was no joke. At the very bottom of the box lay a faded will, signed and sealed. Maggie's heart sank as she read aloud, "To my dearest, Clara Thompson, I bequeath this house and its contents." The will was dated a year before they had bought the place, and Clara Thompson wasn't a name either of them recognized. Tom's face turned ashen. "You're kidding, right? This has to be some kind of mix-up." Maggie could see the stress lines deepening on his forehead, mirroring her own unease. "We're not even supposed to be here. This house was ours." The implications hit them like a ton of bricks. If Clara Thompson had a legal claim to the house, their entire renovation project, and the home they'd hoped to restore, was in jeopardy. And those sparkling jewels? They were worth a fortune. A small fortune that could have settled their debts if only they could claim it. Maggie and Tom were in shock, standing amidst the remnants of their plans and dreams. They sat on the dusty floor, the box between them, each lost in their own whirlwind of thoughts. "What do we do now?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling. Tom rubbed his temples, his frustration evident. "We need to find Clara Thompson. If she has a claim, we need to negotiate or figure out what's next. This house, everything we've put into it, could be for nothing." Maggie and Tom had embarked on this house project with hopes of rekindling their connection and starting anew. Their divorce, a painful chapter marked by miscommunication and unmet expectations, had left them both emotionally scarred. Tom had been absorbed in his career, often leaving Maggie feeling neglected and alone, while Maggie's own dreams had seemed to fade into the background. They'd hoped that renovating their old family home, a place brimming with shared memories, would provide a fresh start and bridge the gap that had grown between them. The project was meant to be more than just about bricks and mortar. It was their attempt to rebuild trust and find common ground, turning the remnants of their past into a symbol of hope for their future. But now, with the new will threatening their plans, it all could be for nothing, casting a shadow over their dreams of renewal. Digging deeper in the documents, they unearthed a crucial detail. The will had been signed not just by Clara, but also by her former husband, Henry Thompson. His address was scribbled on a faded piece of paper, offering a new lead in their quest for answers. Eager to understand more, Maggie and Tom traveled to Henry's last known address. Upon arrival, they were met by the current homeowners, an elderly couple who had known Henry well. They invited Maggie and Tom in, sensing the gravity of their inquiry. As they settled in the cozy living room, the couple began to share Clara and Henry's story, a tale filled with heartbreak and regret. "Henry and Clara were once very much in love," the elderly man began, his voice tinged with sadness. "They had a beautiful life together, but their happiness was overshadowed by a struggle that many don't understand." His wife nodded, adding softly, "Clara couldn't have children, despite their best efforts. They went through 4 heartbreaking miscarriages." Maggie and Tom listened, their hearts heavy with the gravity of Clara's pain. The man continued, "Henry desperately wanted children. He thought he needed to start over to have a family, so he divorced Clara. She was devastated, and she changed after that." The woman's eyes were moist as she recounted the rest. "Clara went missing after the divorce. She wandered the streets, struggling to cope with her grief and loss. It was like she vanished from the world, Tom clenched his jaw, feeling a pang of guilt for the unintentional part they had played in reawakening this painful history. What happened to Henry? Why did he leave the house and jewelry to her if she was in such a state? The couple exchanged glances before the man spoke again. Henry realized too late that he had made a mistake. After years of searching, he finally found Clara living on the streets. He tried to make amends, to apologize for the pain he had caused her, but she was beyond his reach, mentally and emotionally. It broke his heart. The woman added, before Henry died, he managed to get Clara to a shelter. He left her the house and the jewels in hope that one day she might find peace. But the years of hardship had taken their toll. By then, she wasn't in a condition to enjoy or even use what was left for her. Maggie's eyes filled with tears as she absorbed the tragic story. She and Tom had hoped to find answers about Clara's claim, but instead, they uncovered a tale of profound loss and regret. So, even though the house and the jewels were left to her, she was never in a position to reclaim them. It was like a cruel twist of fate, Maggie said, her voice breaking. Tom nodded, feeling a deep sense of empathy for both Clara and Henry. It's heartbreaking. All of this, the house, the jewels, it's tied up in so much pain. The elderly couple offered their condolences and encouraged Maggie and Tom to honor Clara's legacy by using the house for something positive. Perhaps it's time to make it a place where others can find solace and healing, just as Clara might have wished. Returning to their old family home, Maggie and Tom were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They decided to transform the house into a community center dedicated to supporting those in need, offering a place of hope and healing. As they worked on the renovations with this new vision in mind, they found themselves growing closer, united not just by their own past but by the shared mission to bring light to Clara's shadowed legacy. As the community center began to take shape, it quickly became a beacon of hope and support for those in need. The local community rallied around it, and it wasn't long before the center was buzzing with activity, support groups, workshops, and social events. Maggie and Tom felt a deep sense of pride in their work, seeing the positive impact it had on people's lives. Just when things seemed to be on the right track, a sleek, black car pulled up one day, and out stepped a well-dressed businessman named Richard Langford. He introduced himself as a wealthy philanthropist with a keen interest in investing in community projects. Richard offered Maggie and Tom a substantial sum of money, more than they'd ever imagined, with one condition. They had to transform the center into a high-end boutique and upscale event space, catering to the affluent clientele he had in mind. Maggie and Tom were stunned. On one hand, the offer promised financial stability and potential for further community outreach. On the other hand, it seemed like a betrayal of everything Clara's memory and their original vision stood for. The community center had become a sanctuary for those who needed it most, and turning it into a luxury venue felt like it would go against the very spirit of what they'd worked so hard to build. They spent sleepless nights debating the offer, torn between the lure of financial security and their commitment to Clara's legacy. One evening, as they sat together, Maggie's voice wavered with emotion. "Tom, I know this money could make a huge difference, but what if we're losing sight of why we started this in the first place? What if we're trading Clara's memory for a price?" Tom looked out the window, grappling with his own feelings. "I know, Maggie, but think of all the good we could do with that money. We could expand, reach more people, help even more families. It's a tough choice, but we need to decide what's truly important." As they faced this moral crossroads, Maggie and Tom realized that the decision was more than just about money. It was about staying true to their values and honoring the spirit of the community they had built. The conflict forced them to confront their own priorities and the essence of their mission, shaping their journey in ways they had never anticipated. After a lot of soul searching, Maggie and Tom made the tough decision to reject Richard's offer. They couldn't bring themselves to turn the community center into something that didn't align with Clara's legacy. It wasn't easy, but they felt a sense of peace knowing they were staying true to their original mission. But Richard didn't give up that easily. He kept coming back, showing up with more enticing offers and promises of what they could achieve together. Maggie noticed that his persistence wasn't just about the business anymore. There was something in the way he looked at her, the way he lingered a little longer in their conversations, that made her feel like there was more to his visits. At first, Maggie brushed it off, but as time went on, she couldn't help but notice how charming Richard was. He was kind, attentive, and genuinely seemed to care about her well-being. He listened to her dreams and fears in a way that made her feel seen and appreciated. And she couldn't deny that there was a spark between them. A spark she hadn't felt in a long time. Tom noticed the change in Maggie too. He saw the way Richard made her smile, how she seemed lighter when he was around. It made him realize that he had taken her for granted during their marriage, too focused on his career and not enough on their relationship. Seeing Maggie with Richard stirred up feelings of jealousy and regret, but also a deep fear of losing her for good. Maggie found herself torn between the possibility of rekindling her romance with Tom or starting fresh with Richard. On one hand, Tom was familiar, and they shared a history that no one else could understand. But Richard offered something new, something exciting, and she was drawn to the idea of a new beginning with someone who seemed to value her in ways she had longed for. The choice weighed heavily on her, leaving her unsure of what her heart truly wanted. One evening, after days of avoiding the growing tension, Tom showed up at the community center with a determined look in his eyes. He asked Maggie to meet him in the small, cozy room they had recently finished renovating, the one that had become a sort of haven for her. She agreed, feeling a knot of uncertainty forming in her stomach. As they sat down, Tom took a deep breath, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a raw vulnerability that Maggie hadn't seen in years. "Maggie, I need to say something, and I need you to really hear me this time," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I messed up. I got so caught up in my work, in my own world, that I forgot what really mattered. I forgot you." Maggie felt her heart tighten. This was the conversation she had waited for, longed for, during the lonely nights when their marriage was falling apart. But now, it was almost too painful to hear. Tom continued, "I know I hurt you, and I know I took us for granted. But I've changed, Maggie. This project, this place, it's made me realize what we lost, what I lost. And I don't want to lose you again." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes as she listened. There was sincerity in Tom's voice, a genuine regret that cut through her doubts. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and said, "I'm not asking you to forget the past, but I'm asking for a chance to make it right, to rebuild not just this center, but us, together." Maggie's mind swirled with emotions, memories of their happier times, the pain of their separation, and the uncertainty of what the future might hold. She squeezed Tom's hand, her heart torn between the familiarity of the past and the fear of repeating old mistakes. This was the moment she had to decide if she could truly forgive, if she could let go of the hurt and take a leap of faith into the unknown. Maggie sat there, holding Tom's hand, feeling the weight of his words. But as much as she wanted to believe that things could be different this time, something inside her just couldn't shake the memories of all the times he'd let her down. The promises he'd made and broken, the nights she'd waited up alone, hoping he'd come home with more than just apologies. She'd given him so many chances before, and each time, she ended up back in the same place, hurt and disappointed. So, with a heavy heart, Maggie gently pulled her hand away. "Tom, I'll always care about you, but I think it's time we both face the truth. We've tried so many times, and it never seems to work. I need to move forward, and I think you do too. I'm sorry, but I can't go back to that place again." Tom's face fell, the hope in his eyes dimming, but he nodded, understanding that this was truly the end for them. It was the hardest decision Maggie had ever made, but deep down, she knew it was the right one. A few days later, Maggie found herself spending more time with Richard. He was different, attentive, charming, and he made her feel special in a way that Tom never quite managed to. Before long, they began seeing each other romantically, and for a while, it seemed like things were finally falling into place. Maggie started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be the fresh start she needed. But one day, as she was passing by Richard's office at the community center, she heard him talking on the phone with someone. She stopped in her tracks when she heard her name. She leaned in closer, just in time to hear him say, "Yes, the plan is going smoothly. Maggie trusts me now. Once I have control of the property, everything will fall into place." Clara's connection to the place has been a real asset. Maggie's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Richard wasn't just interested in her. He had a secret agenda. All the charm, all the kindness, it had been a calculated move to gain her trust. And worse, Clara's memory was somehow tied up in this mess. She felt sick to her stomach, betrayal and anger swirling inside her. What did Richard really want? And how far was he willing to go to get it? Maggie's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing as she tried to process what she'd just overheard. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the wall, feeling like the ground was slipping out from under her. Richard had been playing her all along. The thought made her stomach churn. How could she have been so blind? She quickly moved away from the door, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness that threatened to swallow her whole. All this time, she had thought she was moving forward, finding something real with Richard, but it was all a lie, just like the lies she had tried to leave behind with Tom. Maggie knew she couldn't confront Richard just yet. She needed to know more. What exactly was his connection to Clara? And why was he so desperate to control the community center? She spent the next few days quietly gathering information, piecing together the puzzle that was slowly starting to make sense. It wasn't easy, pretending everything was fine when she was seething with anger, but she knew she had to be careful. Finally, she found the missing piece. A dusty old photo tucked away in a forgotten corner of the community center's storage room. It was a picture of Clara, smiling, standing beside a young man. The man was unmistakably Richard, but he looked different, softer, younger, without the sharp edges he had now. The back of the photo had a note scrawled in Clara's handwriting. "To my dear nephew Richard, I hope this home brings you the peace you seek." Maggie's heart sank as the truth hit her. Richard wasn't just after the property for business reasons. He was Clara's nephew, the last living relative she had, and he believed the community center rightfully belonged to him. His plan to charm Maggie and take over the property suddenly made sense, but it didn't excuse the deception. Maggie realized she was caught in the middle of a family conflict she never saw coming, and now she had to figure out how to protect the community center and herself before it was too late. Maggie stood there, the old photo trembling in her hand, her mind reeling from the revelation. She felt a surge of conflicting emotions, betrayal, pity, and a strange sense of understanding. Richard wasn't just some heartless schemer. He was a man trying to reclaim a piece of his family's past. But the way he'd gone about it, deceiving her, manipulating her, was unforgivable. Determined to confront him, Maggie decided to play it cool until she had the chance to talk to him face to face. That evening, she invited Richard over to the community center under the pretense of discussing future plans. When he arrived, his usual confident smile faltered slightly at the sight of her serious expression. "Maggie, is everything okay?" Richard asked, his voice tinged with concern, though Maggie now knew better than to trust it. "I found something today," she replied, her voice steady, holding up the photograph. Richard's eyes widened as he recognized the picture. For a moment, he was speechless, his facade cracking. "So, it's true," Maggie continued, her tone unwavering. "You're Clara's nephew. All this time you were just using me to get the property. Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to, Maggie, I really did. But I was afraid you wouldn't understand. This place, it's all I have left of her. She was like a second mother to me after my parents died. When I found out she had lost it, that the property had passed on to someone else, I couldn't bear it. I thought if I could get close to you, maybe I could manipulate me into giving it to you." Maggie interrupted, her voice rising. "Did you ever care about me, or was it all just part of your plan?" Richard looked down, guilt and regret etched on his face. "It started as a plan, but I did care about you, Maggie, more than I ever expected. But now, I've ruined everything, haven't I?" Maggie felt a lump in her throat. She could see the pain in Richard's eyes, the same kind of pain she'd seen in her own reflection after her divorce. But no matter how much she sympathized with his past, she couldn't overlook the fact that he had tried to deceive her. She had to protect what she had worked so hard to rebuild. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Maggie said quietly, taking a step back. "But I do know one thing. This community center isn't just a building. It's a place of healing, of hope, and I'm not going to let anyone take that away, not even you." Richard nodded slowly, realizing that he had lost her trust for good. He turned to leave, but before he walked out the door, he looked back at Maggie with one final, sorrowful glance. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I really am." As the door closed behind him, Maggie felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She had protected the community center, but at what cost? Her heart ached with the loss of what could have been, but she knew she had made the right choice. Now, she had to move forward, rebuild once again, this time on her own terms. Weeks passed, and Maggie threw herself into the community center, determined to make it a place of healing and growth. She didn't think much about Richard after he left, or at least, she tried not to. But something strange started happening. Donations began pouring in, more than she had ever expected, and supplies arrived just when they were needed most. New programs were launched, and the center was thriving in ways Maggie hadn't dared to dream. At first, she chalked it up to luck or maybe some local goodwill, but then she noticed the pattern. The anonymous donations were too consistent, the timing too perfect. It wasn't just random generosity, it was someone who knew exactly what the center needed. Curiosity got the better of her, and Maggie started digging, tracing the origins of the funds and resources that had been flooding in. It didn't take long for her to connect the dots. All the trails led back to Richard. He had been quietly supporting the community center all along, even after she had confronted him and sent him away. The realization hit her hard. Richard had been helping her, helping the center, despite everything. But why? Was it guilt, regret, or something deeper? Maggie's emotions were a tangled mess as she struggled with what to do next. Part of her wanted to march right up to Richard and demand an explanation, but another part of her was deeply moved by his actions. He could have walked away, left her and the sender behind, but he hadn't. Instead, he had chosen to support her, quietly and selflessly. It was something Tom had never done, not in all their years together. Finally, Maggie couldn't stand it anymore. She reached out to Richard, asking him to meet her at the community center. When he arrived, she saw the surprise in his eyes, but also a glimmer of hope. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why help? After everything that happened?" Richard looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Because I care about you, Maggie. And because I wanted to do something right for once. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could make up for my mistakes. But I didn't want to force my way back into your life. I wanted to let you decide." Maggie's heart ached as she listened. She realized that the choice before her wasn't just about Richard. It was about her own future, her own happiness. Could she forgive him? Could she allow herself to trust again? And more importantly, could she see a future with Richard that was different from the past she had left behind with Tom? The decision weighed heavily on her, but for the first time in a long while, Maggie felt a spark of hope. Maggie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision in front of her. She looked into Richard's eyes, searching for any sign of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. Slowly, she nodded, her heart pounding with both fear and excitement. I think I'm ready to give this a chance," she said softly. A relieved smile spread across Richard's face. He stepped closer, gently taking her hands in his. "Maggie, I promise I won't let you down. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm committed to making things right, starting with us and this community center." Maggie smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She leaned in, and Richard met her halfway, their kiss soft but filled with promise. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real, and it was theirs. They were two people with flaws and a complicated past, but they were also two people willing to try again, to build something new together. As the weeks turned into months, Maggie and Richard's relationship blossomed. They worked side by side at the community center, turning it into a thriving hub that truly made a difference in people's lives. The locals, who had once been skeptical, now embraced the center and the couple behind it. Maggie found herself happier than she had been in years, finally feeling like she was where she was meant to be. And as for Tom, he remained a part of Maggie's life, but in a different way. They had an honest conversation, acknowledging the love they once shared but also recognizing that they were better off as friends. Tom respected Maggie's decision and was genuinely happy for her, supporting her and Richard in their new venture. He even started volunteering at the community center, finding a sense of purpose and peace in giving back. In the end, Maggie realized that sometimes life's twists and turns lead you exactly where you need to be. She had found love again, not by looking back, but by looking forward and embracing the possibilities of the future. And with Richard by her side and Tom as a loyal friend, Maggie knew she had finally found her happy ending. Did you enjoy this story? Comment below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.